Hey, what's going on, guys? I hope everyone had a fantastic Thanksgiving, and I hope you enjoyed the short week as well. Despite it being a short week, it was a very hectic one, and I will be lying if I said we didn't call this. Unfortunately, I wasn't positioned for it, so kind of bittersweet. But as you guys know, I like to trade a lot based on structure, where we have higher highs, higher lows. Especially when a bottom's found, I like to capture the higher low off of a discount, right? We get a 618 pullback or a pullback to the point 0.5, anything that's discounted. And unfortunately, it just lined up where the rally took 4 days or 5 days or whatever, and it lined up perfectly with the holidays where we had low volume. We never got a pullback, right? So I don't think it's quite done. I've been talking about QQQ being the leader. QQQ hasn't hit 630 yet, but obviously SPY has reached the spot where I thought it would go to, which is right around 683 to 685. But everything lined up perfect, right? Where we saw, and I was talking about this forever, right? Where we kind of saw a three lower low sweep on the daily, but primarily the hourly, right? Where it was kind of in this range here, and then we saw our final third low kind of occur on this day here, 1120, that swept out the 1010 lows, right? So really nice three lower low accumulation. Price ended up marking up, and although it's moving up on low volume, that's typically how it goes whenever you have an accumulation occur, right? The high volume comes at the lows, no high volume at the highs, which doesn't indicate selling, and then it moves up on lower volume. It could have been masked by the holidays, but we don't quite know what's going to happen at the other end of the holidays. But yeah, this is kind of how it works, guys. And to add fuel to the fire, we were also talking about the potential for a secondary Greek squeeze, where we were talking about Vana and Charm. I talk about this pretty frequently, not only from the aspect of trading in, kind of looking for shorts or kind of being hands off in the windows of non-strength after OPEX, but also taking advantage of them whenever the non-strength flows dissipate. We end up looking to go long on any weakness leading into the week of OPEX for that kind of final push or a reinvigoration into the market, especially above the 20-day. But also the primary one was Vana, right? Vana, if you guys don't know, is a sensitivity to, I guess, volatility is the best way to put it. So VIX obviously had a huge spike, and then after VIX spiked, we ended up pushing up, right, where we kind of caught the bottom down here. And then as we were moving up, you guys already know the 2 week window of non-strength lined up perfectly with the holidays. So there's like a time crunch where bears or sellers have to really capitalize on any downside momentum. But price started to ultimately move up, which killed the VIX. And then on top of that, right, any time, or I guess like in this window where they could have capitalized on it, we had holidays, right? So days that they have opportunity are now being cut down. You have volatility then dropping. So there was kind of like a Vana squeeze or some kind of Vana support. I don't really think it was a charm-based squeeze, so kind of everything went to plan. But now, really, what I'm looking for, right, is still a pullback. As I said, QQQ has really been leading the move here. If I just drop this to the hourly really quickly, I take off this really quick. Right, you guys can see all the high volume was primarily at the lows, right? So big volume spike here. Obviously, this was kind of like the secondary low. The first low was here, right? This was like what I thought would be like the first primary low. This was our high volume spike where we ended up popping out. We ended up sweeping underneath this a little bit. We popped back above, and this is a little bit more apparent on Qs, so I'll jump over to that. I think Qs was probably the better chart for this. Right, you guys can see, right, we ended up sweeping out from this bar or this swing low. We ended up sweeping it here. We got a high volume spike. We ended up ripping up. And then we swept underneath this low. We consolidated here. We had the NVIDIA earnings day where we then broke out and kind of popped above 610. This is where I thought we'd have like a base or break and base and go, right? Or a gap and go is probably the better way to phrase it. We ended up selling off, and we had that huge sell-off. But really, all it did was it pulled down into 580, which was a pretty big dark pull print I kind of forgot about. We basically bottomed off of 580. We pushed up to 589, and then really just kind of reclaimed this low here. So as you guys can see, right, we had our first like kind of major low range here. We had our secondary low, and then we had our third low, which lines up with the three lower low accumulation. We kind of had our test candle here, and then we ripped up, right? We've been ripping up on low volume, and really this is pushed up to 621. If I take a look here on the daily, pretty big spot, right? I would expect sellers to step in either at 621 or 623. I don't really think this gets through on the first shot. But still, right, I've been pretty patient. The first thing I prefaced in the video was I'm not long on this yet. I still think that a pullback is necessary, especially if you are moving up on low volume. And I know it's masked behind the holidays, but it's just from a simple risk to reward perspective. It's looking for, any kind of sign that if it does pull back, right, let's say, a lot of institutions come back from the holidays and it does sell off, they take profits. Can it hold a higher load? Is this a meaningful bottom that was found that has room for another leg up? That's the big thing that we're looking for. So my natural spot that I'm looking at is the NWOG, right? So 1121 going into 1124. This is like that 560 spot. If I just mark this here, I'm expecting selling to kind of come near these highs up here. Obviously, if it breaks through, what is this, the 1112 candle, it's probably going to trade upwards into the 687. I'd probably be hands off at that point. But I am kind of looking for a short here where we can catch this for a move all the way back down into 660 and then look for a bounce off of that. And obviously, we need to trend up, so higher lows from here. And then ultimately make a new high or push up into this gap fill that's still unfilled right here at 687, right? So that's kind of what I'm looking for. Even from a more simplistic view, if we just pull our fibs from our low to where our current high could potentially be, maybe it's up here, or maybe it's down here at the close, right? Pullback leads us right into 663. So still need to wait for that higher low. You definitely don't want to be chasing a week like this. It just doesn't make any sense. Some people would call this a lockout rally. That's kind of what I think it is. But as I said, I think it's a Vana-fueled move. A short week. Holidays were around. The accumulation that occurred on the hourly, a lot of people were really, really scared with the VIX spike and in each new low being swept out. So I think a lot of people are likely going to chase this, and I think the patient fish wins, right? So whoever can just wait the longest will ultimately kind of see or reap the most reward here. So that's kind of what I'm looking for, is a pullback to 660, 663. This is some of the craziest stuff I've seen too. I'll pull up my other drawing set that I have here. I'm not a big pattern trader guy, but this really does look like an inverse head and shoulders, right? Where we have left shoulder there, kind of like the head here, and then a pullback for the right shoulder would be somewhere in that 663, 660 range. It's kind of what I'm looking for. And then on top of that, right, we've been talking a lot about dark pools, right? I'm not going to go into dark pools. I feel like I explain it so much in terms of bids and the asks, and I always talk about how the market's an auction. If you guys don't know, bidding, right, is obviously buyers that are looking to buy lower, but that is a pull on price, right? So all my purple lines here are all the bids that we saw this week. So we saw a massive amount at 675. It was like 41 at the close. I think it ended up going to like 60 or 70. The big one to the upside was 684, so that's why I have an upside one. That's why I was so bullish on the market. There was like 60 or 70 here as they were doing the 3 lower low accumulation on the hourly / daily. That's honestly why I figured this would rally back up. And now that we're pushing up into this spot here, I think we will see some selling off 684 or 683, which is the gap fill here. And then, as I said, we had a large amount at 675, we had more at 673.69, and then we had another lot that was all the way down here that was pushing the 60s as well at 660. And then on Friday, right, or not Friday, I'm sorry, Thursday, right? Oh no, actually it was Friday. Wow, I'm kind of losing track of my days. But on Friday, on the short holiday, we saw a really weird one where we saw not only 23 at 679.8, but we saw a scattered amount, not a ton here, but 674.7, 673.1, 673.7. And I've never really seen it like this, where they are just nonstop every single day, bidding down, bidding down, bidding down. And on the last day of the week, it's just multiple transactions bidding lower once again, right? So that's one part of it. Another thing, if you guys don't know, I think they took it off, but I saw a huge phantom print midday, right, which is kind of like, I think I sent it to one of my buddies here. Let's see if I can find it on what the daily actually looked like. Let me pull this up really quick. So that's what the daily looked like. I think they fixed it now, but the daily showed this massive hammer candle with a large wick all the way down to 673.69. If you guys go take a look as well, on like a smaller time frame here, there was a large wick that never actually occurred, but it showed up on the charts, right? This pulled all the way to 673.69. If you guys go kind of take a look at those dark pool levels here, this is exactly where they're bidding down to. So I feel like the off exchange orders that were on the bid side somehow reflected onto charts, right? Or somehow reflected onto the lit exchange. So back tested this for a long time now. Anytime these show up, they usually work pretty well. If you guys didn't know, Intel was another big one that had it. I wonder if I can go back really quickly. That was the most recent one that I saw. Time axis, we'll go like 30 days. Yeah, so one right here, this was obviously a big one. This never pulled up on any other chart. Thinkorswim usually has them pretty nicely, or pretty consistently is probably the best word. But it was a move back up into 39.5, 39.85, which was this old gap here. This occurred when price was down here, like right around 37. It obviously consolidated, got a nice pop into it, sold down, kind of did the same exact thing where I talked about the 3 lower low. This was in the same time frame that QQQ was doing it, and then ultimately got a huge rip all the way up into that spot there. There's a lot more that I can kind of go into. This is just the most recent example, but these phantom prints are pretty crazy, and how they do them. Usually an accumulation is set up with that, or a distribution depending on the percentage or deviation it is away from that wick or wherever it ends up going to. So pretty crazy that we're now seeing this on SPY, right? So SPY, like I said, down into 673.69. I would also flex that into 675. So right now, like I said, I'm kind of bearish, and I'm bearish to become a buyer, if that makes sense. I want to see 684, 683 end up kind of stalling out. I want to see a sell-off into 673, 675, maybe, something like this where it pulls down into this spot, it catches a buyer, and then it starts to break down again, right? And it kind of retests it from below. Ideally, those bids then flip to asks, and we start to see a sell wall here, and then we end up getting a continuation even further down into 660. And then, as I kind of pointed out earlier, that would be the right shoulder for the inverse head and shoulders, or really just a discounted higher low. That's kind of how I view it. But I know a lot of people are pattern traders. I just wanted to give like I said, a more simplistic view of it. So that is that. Kind of what I'm looking at for SPY. Another one is AVGO, right? AVGO, I've been talking about for quite some time. If you guys were a part of this was pretty sick. I was noticing the relative strength on this name. Obviously, this did sell off as well, but for the most part, AVGO really just held this range for forever, right? The market was selling off. We saw the 1010 liquidation event. We saw the 1120 event, but this still maintained its range. It never filled the gap. It was just kind of holding these upper ranges, and I ended up longing it on 1121. Looking for a push up into 674 or 675. Next day, we literally got a massive bar, and I posted this on Twitter as well. I don't think I posted the alert that was just for Discord, but I posted just kind of the gains and the thought process behind it. But yeah, we got like basically a 10% move intraday, which was pretty crazy. These contracts went, I think, like 200, 250%. I bought January, I think. I could have probably flexed out and got something a little bit shorter dated for a bigger gain, but this was nice. Big launch up into this spot here. But if you guys take a look, this looks very similar to Wyckoff distribution. I mean, if we just take a look at this, and I'll pull this up really quick and just overlap the volume. Volume is saying everything, right? Where this could potentially be the buy climax here, up thrust here, right? And then from here, I think this is potentially the UTAD. If you guys aren't very familiar with that Wyckoff methodology in depth, is a great book, a great introductory into Wyckoff and understanding volume price analysis, tie it into the schematics themselves, but really looks eerily similar, right? Where we have buy climax, we have the automatic reaction, kind of like right here. So buy climax, automatic reaction. I'll pull this back onto my screen. We have a little bit of a slip on the MSAL, which I believe was like right around here. Obviously the up thrust as well in this range here. We pulled back down, right, and then we have the UTAD here, and the UTAD And the biggest part for me is the volumes all kind of aligning. High volume here, high volume for the up thrust, high volume for the UTAT, and it's not really making much larger, higher highs, right? Especially for the buy climax and the up thrust. It's kind of just testing the supply, testing willing buyers here. They're pulling it back down, they're reaccumulating the inventory, and then they're looking for the final phase of the sell on the breakout through the highs here, right? So volume is extremely elevated, as you guys can see throughout this breakout here. Primarily through the buy climax back here and through the up thrust, and then it's starting to kind of dissolve as we make a new high. So I really genuinely think that if this can crack down from and we don't know how high the UTAT can go. Obviously, the higher the better, as the risk to reward becomes more extreme and in favor of shorting it. Right? Sorry, I just hiccuped. So, if it can push like 403, 405, I would like to see this break back down underneath the up thrust high, right? So, which is 386.48, bounce off of the buy climax high, retest right here, right? And then that would be our test. And then we're looking for a break underneath, or maybe just another consecutive bounce off of this that's a little bit shallower, right? Something like that. Or we get a breach under it, like this, and then we break under the buy climax high, retest that. I think this has a great opportunity to trade back into, I would say, the bottom of this breakout bar here, or just pat down into the gap at like 340, right? So something like this, and then I think this could start like a longer term downtrend where this then comes down into 306. That remains to be seen, but I like the opportunity here. This is one of the better distribution schematics I've seen in a while. Obviously, I've been talking about Meta. I talked about UNH. Those are the main ones that come to mind. But this looks picture perfect. Volume aligns. The schematic itself aligns. It's almost too good to be true. And they do have earnings coming up on 12/11. So the catalyst could be earnings itself. I do have a small position here with 2 contracts for 12/19, so about 8 days after earnings. I do plan on sizing into these. Obviously I want to get as close to earnings as I possibly can. Contracts, when I bought them, I bought 2 at like 1,000 per. So I spent about $2,000 on that. I really didn't care about my average until we get a little bit closer. But now that we're, what day is it? We're basically coming into December 1st. These contracts are like 6.0, 5.5, so I'm down about 50% on them. But like I said, that's fine, right? I want to try to get to like 10 contracts. Ideally, I can scoop the remaining 8, like right around like $3 to like 4. I can get my average to like 6 or 7. And then ideally, we earnings sells us all the way down to 348, or this cracks underneath into 374. It bounces up into 386, and then I'll add again. And then we look for, ideally, it doesn't give us this little part here, right? Ideally, picture perfect world. This thing just kind of breaks all the way down into 348. But yeah, that is kind of what I'm looking for. I think this sells all of the semiconductor names. So this is really what I'm looking at, guys. Just a nice little earnings trade that has a little bit of leeway with about 8 days till expiration, where I can conveniently add into these and kind of let this just continue to simmer down into that 350, 348 spot. Like I said, though, if AVGO ends up breaking down, all semis I think will come down with it. One name that I am tracking, I took a loss on this actually. I took 5 contracts. I believe it was this day here. I think it was here on 11/24. I shorted it here as it broke underneath this 207, 203 highlighted zone that I have. If I zoom this back out, you guys will see kind of the range that I was looking at. We'll go 3 years. It was this old gap fill from back here, right? I think this is 2024, from way back here in this old distribution back in March. Really, right, this created a gap above this spot. It broke down underneath, so I thought, hey, they did sweep out on this day here, right? We saw a sweep on 11/21. The volume was pretty low, although elevated, so I wanted to see if it could maybe stick around here, or maybe I was looking for a breakdown, if I can draw this correctly, oh my god, a breakdown like this as it did, and then a push up really quickly into 224, which is like our break of structure, right? This was like a higher low here that caught, that made a higher high, caught again at the same spot, and then a lower high, and then it broke structure, and then now we have potential for lower highs against this spot here, right? So that's kind of what I was hoping for, but on this day here, It looked a little weak. The volume was pretty abysmal. So I think I shorted on this day, or I shorted the morning of, and then this ended up breaking down again. And then it swept underneath this candle, started to push back up. So I closed out of these, and then it started to push up again. And as it was pushing into this gap fill here, I think I was kind of front running it a little bit. I took 5 contracts or something like that, or maybe I had 5 left over. I don't remember the exact details of the one I lost, but I know I had 5 cons. And then ultimately this ended up kind of breaking above 215. So I'm still watching this. I want to see if this can push up into 224.88 and retest this break of structure here. If it hits this, I want to see a break off of that level, right? Sell off on high volume is the ideal thing. Create some separation against it, and I think this can come down once again into this range here, probably another lower high similar to what we had back here. And then I want to see a lower low, not only underneath the gap fill here, but underneath these bars that ended up catching it for this potential lower high spot, right? So we want to see a break under that, retest of here, and then I think AMD has a chance to break down into the gap fill here at 164. But this is a gap within a gap, so it's kind of strange. We have a gap fill at 173 to 176 that was unfilled from back on 818 and 819. So this would probably be my first target here. I wouldn't really target 165 just yet. So if that happens, AVGO sells the market. I might look to kind of dabble into AMD again. I think I just took those 5 contracts a little bit early, but this is kind of what I'm watching. On top of that, NVIDIA doesn't look that good either, guys. I mean, the Qs was rallying, the whole market was rallying, and NVIDIA has been basically a non-participant. This thing looks like distribution as well, right? It looks pretty weird in terms of like a buy climax, up thrust, UTAD. Looks eerily similar to not only Meta, right, where we were tracking Meta. It looks very similar to and I forgot about this time, IBIT, right? IBIT was a huge distribution that started back here, right? I don't know if you guys want me to go over this, but I mean, this was the buy climax here. We had an up thrust here, and then this was the weekly UTAD. But in that weekly UTAD, they turned it into like a daily distribution. So it's kind of a crazy one. But NVIDIA is looking eerily similar to all of those as well, right? Just in a smaller time frame. So I think NVIDIA has a chance to really kind of start breaking down. I would say it already filled this 164 gap and maybe down into 160. It's not my primary focus, but it's just kind of weird that semis are kind of struggling here. NVIDIA is obviously the forefront of it, but AVGO is a pretty big name as well, right? And AVGO kind of dictates the market just as much as, I wouldn't say as NVIDIA, but more than AMD, I would say at times. I remember AVGO had a huge rally. I think it was a few months ago, and this pretty much led the market. So it's just weird to see these non-participants NVIDIA not be a participant relative to where a lot of these structures are at. So I would love to see AVGO miss and then kind of attack AMD on top of that. And that's pretty much all I got. Only other name that I'm kind of watching here too is Meta. I've talked about Meta, kind of the same idea, right? Where buy climax, up thrust, UTAD, LPSY or the test here, or test LPSY here, doesn't really matter. But a clear MSAL, right? This was our minor sign of weakness here that created this upper range where they were distributing. And I never thought we'd get this, right? I thought once we started to break down, this name was one of the weaker tech names out there, and it basically sold all the way down into this 592 gap from back here on 5.9. I thought we'd go all the way to 550, which is what I'm targeting, but this is fortunately giving us a really clean V-shaped recovery where I think this can either push up into 669 or push all the way up into 691. If it can push into 691, I am looking short on this. I think this is the retest of the MSAO, and then I think this can get, pull all the way back to 630, lower high, right? Come down into 592, lower high, and then break ultimately down into 550. So Meta is definitely on watch. I just don't think it's ready just yet. I actually want it to keep going up, like I said, into 669 to 691. If this breaks through 691, it's kind of null and void. I think this could trade all the way back up into like 740, 734. But this name is lightly on watch for me. And that's really all I got. just wanted to kind of cover these really quickly. Sorry, it is kind of late, guys. It's 2:30. I think I'm slurring my speech. I might have said things a couple times or repeated myself more than once. So I apologize, but I just wanted to jump on. I was pretty excited about kind of the stuff I'm seeing in the market, and yeah, I know some people too were kind of disappointed, like feeling like we missed out on QQQ. But honestly, better safe than sorry. You guys should know by now. I trade structure. I'm not going to ever try to catch a bottom. Maybe I used to. It feels good doing that, but kind of diving into bottoms like that and sweeps like that, if you're wrong and it just kind of breaks down and capitulates and you keep adding and adding and adding, by the time it catches a higher low, right, you're going to be too emotional to realize it's a higher low, or you're not going to have enough cash to add the higher low. And that, unfortunately, happened to me back in April, right? If you guys remember April, I added in this range here. It kind of popped out. It pulled down underneath, and I remember I added here into this first like major gap down, which was like our second low, and then we had our third low here, which ended up being the true capitulation. And then it ripped, and I remember I added here, and then it pulled back again, and I didn't have the confidence, and I didn't want to put the money in because I felt like I would have been too uncomfortable with how much size I had into this. And if you guys remember, I had over 400 cons, and this was kind of the same thing, right? A lot of people likely were chasing this move here from 4.9. Or chasing the subsequent candles that look like they were kind of rallying or gapping up into that bar as well. And I think a lot of people are probably chasing this gap fill up here. And look what that did. Like literally to a T from the low, if I can click it, to the high here. This was basically a perfect 618 pullback, right? It pulled back as a higher low. Higher low held, and then it rallied and made a new high. And all the late buyers or people that were thinking it was just going to explode either got scared, right, or thought the April tariff fears were not over yet. In reality, it was just a discounted pullback, and that was the real entry. And I don't think it's any different here with SPY, right? And that's kind of like what I've had on the forefront of my mind. Like, okay, shit, I feel like I missed this. Should I just chase? I feel like QQQ to 630 is a given. Like, I could just buy into this. But as I've said, even on this chart here, I still have this drawn. Like, we technically never got a structural pullback that based 610, 609, right? We had absorption here that occurred on 1114, absorption on 1117, absorption 1120, where I thought we'd rip and gap and go. This time, we rallied into this spot, and it was literally just a one-bar pullback, right? It was just a wick here. Just simple price action on one day. We're wicked into this spot and then rallied. Structural pullback is like daily consecutive bars coming down, holding into this spot, and then ripping, right? We haven't gotten that, guys. We really haven't gotten that. So better safe than sorry. I think this will keep you, this will keep the longevity in your trading if you just kind of wait for stuff like this. If it just goes to 630, it's not meant to be. Maybe if it gets to 623 and can base up here, maybe I'll take some like small size into 630, 631. But really, you just want this pullback, right? And I think this is the long that will set up a lot of money that will be worthwhile to put into this trade, and you'll feel pretty protected even though the market's selling. Feel pretty protected against a definitive low here, right? Versus who knows, like if you're buying up here, and it breaks down to 610, and you're like, oh, okay, well 610's holding here. Well, then you can be, subjective, and then you'd be like, okay, well now since 610, 611 broke, actually I'll risk the 21. And then it breaks the 21. Okay, well now never mind. I'm going to risk the 9 EMA, right? And then you can get into such a hole that way. And then from there, okay, well the 21 broke. I'll risk the 50 day. You can get into such a tricky spot there. And you can start to see things that aren't really there or just changing the goalpost. I really don't want to be that way. I'd rather see a higher low, right, somewhere down here or into this. Like as you guys know, I'm trading SPY for this, but it's all the same, right? So this would be 590. This can pull down into 590, right? Then from here, as it starts to rally, your entry would be off 590. All you do is risk down into 580, right? And yeah, that's a much better risk to reward trying to get this move with only a $10 risk versus buying up here, and who knows what you'd hold to, right? And then from 590 all the way up to 630, that's a 7% move, right? So that's a pretty good way to look at it. But I've been rambling for far too long. I'm going to go ahead and conclude the video. It's almost 3 o'clock in the morning, so I need to get some sleep. Hope you guys all enjoyed. I hope you guys took something from this. If you guys have any questions, comments, concerns, please shoot them to me in here on YouTube, or you guys can feel free to message me in the Discord. I've been responding to a lot of DMs on and things like that, and kind of giving my further details on my ideas. Or if you guys are bouncing charts off of me, I don't mind having a little bit of talk about that or dialogue about that. But that's pretty much all I got, guys. Just the SPY short, potentially into a long. And then looking at AVGO, adding into AVGO as those cons get a little bit cheaper, as I would say about 80% sure this is the distribution back down into 348, 350. I just want to try to get some cheap cons, so just kind of letting them deteriorate as we get closer to 12/11, which is their earnings date, and then probably a nice little 10 contract, 15 contract play on that, see what ends up happening with it. And then maybe that gives us a little bit of a spark to then short AMD if we see broad weakness in the semiconductor theme, right? So that's going to be it. Hopefully everyone enjoyed. I'll see you guys next time.